Good evening, this is a special meeting of the Cleveland Common Council for the purpose of ongoing discussion regarding the 2022 budget. If there are no objections, we'll do the pledge of allegiance at the official council meeting instead of at this meeting as well. No objections. Okay, would you please call the roll?
Member Chick,
Here.
Councilmember Murphy,
Here.
Councilmember Davies,
Here.
Councilmember Ritzberger,
Here.
Councilmember LaFarge, here, Councilmember Carson.
Here.
Councilmember Harrington,
Yes.
Councilmember Rafford,
Here.
Councilmember Drake.
Here. Sorry, Luca. Everybody's here. Okay. As usual, I will get a few words in. Sorry, Jim.
It's okay.
Actually, I want to acknowledge that both Ginny and Greg have been very polite and patient with me as I continue to badger them over the budget over the last couple of weeks. And as David Merzick said to me the other day, quite eloquently, that you're probably spending most of your time now limping and quacking. And nobody gets that? That was a joke. Probably, maybe I'm quacking too much. And that may be the case because it seems to be I'm the only one who's getting very worked up over this budget. For me, it is an issue of significant consequence, having a budget in which we are spending $600,000 to $700,000 of our unrestricted fund balance on ongoing operational expenses has consequences. And I'm also bothered by it's been presented in a way that this is it. There's no, we haven't heard any options. You know, what options is the council? If the council's not comfortable with it, are there options? They may be undesirable options. They may be difficult options, but I'd like to be able to counsel for. I mean, this is the responsibility of our elected council members. That is what that's what they're here for. Is their responsibility. You know, quite honestly, we've spent more time, as Mark Davies will attest, talking about what the fence in Wilbur Park will look like, and we have about options for not spending this much in reserves. And I think we need to do better than that. The budgeting this much reserves does have significant consequences. Betting on having up to $1 million of new revenue is a wonderful goal, and I hope we achieve it, but it's not a bet that I would want to make. I don't think the odds are that good. Nor are the odds that good of being able to, if we don't make it, cut our budget in a year from now by up to $1 million. And when we add to that, if I take a look at our capital plan, there's up to $20 million in borrowing over the next 3-4 years for projects, some of which may get put off, but most of them are projects we really want to do. And Ginny maybe will talk a little bit later about what the prognosis is for doing that. But we're talking about money for Lettuce Highway, for West Street, for River Street, infrastructure and roadway, for Market Street, which includes renovation of parking garage and transit hub, and we're going to try to do that on the cheap. But we still know we're going to have to come up with additional money, which will have to be borrowed. Upgrade of E Street and Rugby Street, West Broadway, Belmont Circle, Hudson Street, and that doesn't even begin to talk about the big plans we have for the airport. So I guess, I mean, Jenny, what I want to hear is, are we in such dire straits that there are no options? We must spend this much money this year? Or are there some tough decisions, unpalatable as they may be, which can be presented to council if for them to weigh whether those decisions are worth making in order to not spend as much money. And if so, what are they? I have my own ideas about potential ways to cut some expenses and increase the budget revenue, not to fill the whole gap, of course. And they may not be good ideas, but I'll hold off. I'll share them later after everybody else has had an opportunity. So if this is after tonight's discussion, if it becomes apparent that I'm the only one who has these concerns, I will stop quacking. Well, there may be a little quack here, quack there. But for the most part, I'll stop. With that, Jenny, Greg, you want to take it start?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Greg. We always have options on the budget, but what I would like to present to you tonight is a forecast for what we want to try to accomplish during 2022. As you know, when the request came in from the department heads, this budget had a $4.7 million deficit. We've cut over $4 million from the request, and we're now down to just under 700,000. I want to say it's 670,000, something like that. And when we have reviewed the budget several times, gone line by line, the department heads have reviewed, and we believe that if we are to cut any more of the expenditures out, it will be detrimental to the department heads being able to provide the services that the public expects. And as I was trying to chat about in different conversations that I've had, this is like a perfect storm for us, because our expenses have kept moving along as if it was non-COVID time, but our revenues have not. And the reason being is the information that I sent out to you over the weekend, when I compared back to 2019 when it was pre-COVID, and I also compared to 2020, the amount of revenue loss that we've had in certain categories has in 2019, it totaled $354,000 compared to the 2022 tentative budget, just in different areas, small dollars, but they all add up. When I compared it to 2020, it was over $677,000 that we were not able to budget for. So if we get back up to our pre-COVID activity, for example, interest income, we've lost $120,000 just in our interest earnings because the interest rates have tanked. And if those interest rates start coming back up, and I talked to New York class last week, and they said they're expecting them to start to rise, we will see those revenues come back. If our ambulance activity gets back up to pre-COVID levels, and if our payer mix goes back to pre-COVID levels, which is very important, because depending on the payer mix will depend on how much net income we get, that revenue will go back up. If our licensing and our permits go back up to pre-COVID activity, those revenues will return. So my point is, I just think we need a little bit more time to look at, are things going to return to normal? As pre-COVID levels, are they going to get back up to where they used to be? And also, as I said to you last week, with our 2022 action plan, we've got different things that we want to investigate to see if it's going to actually be feasible and move forward. If those revenues do not come in, that is when Greg and I would like to develop a plan to cut our expenditures and make those difficult decisions. We don't want to do it tonight because we want to have an opportunity to see if our options are viable. And we also want to see if things return to pre-COVID levels. And we're hoping that during 2022, we will be able to give you a more definite answer as far as our revenue levels. So if you allow us the time, and if you allow us the time not only to see how things return to pre-COVID levels, but for the new ideas that we have to explore, then we can give you a more definite plan to say, look, we've tried this, it's not going to work, and now we've got to make the tough decisions. And obviously the tough decisions are going to be services and staffing. And we're just not ready to go there yet with those recommendations, because we do not know what 2022 will bring, just because we're still in the healing process of the pandemic. And even though our expenses have moved along, our revenues have not moved along with them. Also, one thing that I pointed out in the comparing 2019 to 2020 is a lot of the cost increases are due to salaries and fringe benefits. When you have a young staff, especially in our public safety, that's moving through the grid has different steps, and they move at different paces at different dollar amounts. So there's a time period when we have to absorb that step until they get to where it settles out more. And right now, we're in that period when we've got a lot of people in the middle that are moving through those higher steps. So that's why it looks like the payroll is growing at a faster pace than we would like it to, but it's only because of movement and where people are in their careers. We have no control over the retirement system's contribution rate. That is what it is right now. It's about 30% for our public safety employees. It's about 18% for our ERS employees. And when that jumped back, I want to say a year and a half ago, that had a substantial impact on our finances. Health insurance, as you know, the rates went up 7.1%. But as I said to you, when you take a percentage and you apply that to a high number, that's a big adjustment. So we want to look at health insurance costs to see if there's something that we can do differently to see how we could possibly reduce those costs. So we just need time to do it. And if you allow us that time, we can come back in 2022 and say either this worked or this did not work. And then we need to come up with we need to develop a plan to get the expenditures down and make those tough decisions. If you decide that tonight that you do not want to fund the 2022 budget with the 600 and some thousand from fund balance, Greg and I will develop a plan and we'll bring you those difficult decisions at next week's meeting. But what we need to do is have your input. I'm assuming that you've all had enough time to read through, to come with your ideas. Mayor can share his ideas. We can brainstorm it and see if there is something that we can adjust. But when Greg and I went through this, I want to say 3 to 4 times, line by line, person by person, department by department. And we just cut as much as we thought was safe to cut, even though that we weren't able to get it down to 0. So if you would like to share your ideas with me, I would be very happy to hear them. And I don't mean to not provide options, Mayor, but the options that Greg and I thought were good options was to cut what we did and then come up with a 2022 action plan, see if it works, and then give us another year to then come up with the difficult decisions if that's what we have to do.
So does that answer my question on the time period? Because that was my first question. You mentioned it multiple times in your speech tonight that you need time. So what is that length? What is the time period?
I would say 2022
You need the whole year.
to see how, I would say by the fall of 2022, I think we should have a good idea if the ideas that we have in our action plan are feasible.
I'm looking at the 22 action plan from the October 26th packet. I understand the sales tax revenue. You explained the increase in the ambulance fees by $400 per call, but that would only attribute, I forgot that amount, how much it actually going to be returned. It wasn't much.
I want to say, no, it's about $87,000.
I want to understand more about the study possible new ambulance service agreements, which then by that, what is the time period to start the paid parking project? Yes, Greg, I love the stormwater idea. I did my own research on that at the city of Ithaca. I'm looking forward to what you come up with for implementation in the city of Oleana. It seems very fair to 1, 2, and 3-bedroom dwellings, and it actually seems very fair to commercial properties also. So I look forward to hearing more about that. I am curious about the maximize the departmental income fees. I felt that we were already at the max, and I referenced the enterprise fund. When we went back through, you're suggesting that we redo the contracts. Well, for those of us that are on finance and human resource, we just approved those and they came up to council. So are you suggesting that we're gonna go back and renegotiate, or is that something that you're gonna do in 23?
There's a number of contracts that will be coming to the finance committee that you have, that are up for renewal for 2022. And Dave and I met on those, and they'll be being brought to you once he's had the time to talk to the clients. And then as far as the ambulance options, when Greg and I met with Chief Knapp, he told me that, or he told us that he had a lot of ideas that he wanted to explore. I don't know if he's ready to share those yet, but there's a number of ideas that he's thinking about as far as extending ambulance contracts with other entities here locally.
As far as the cannabis sales, and Gary, please chime in, you read this as much as I have. I think we're gonna go all through 22 to the end of 22, possibly 23 before any of that is solidified. I mean, it literally just filled the board, the cannabis control board just got filled September. So, I mean, that's what they were telling us at the New York State Conference of Mayors, that it's more like the end of 22. So I don't see that as a potential revenue source. Yeah, it's more like 23. And then we have no control over the adjusted revenue sharing formula. I think that's something that Gary and I had talked about after the last budget meeting. That's something he's been advocating strongly with the assemblyman and the senator about getting an increase, because it's been flatlined for so many years. So that's really out of our control. So I was just looking at things that are within our control. The expenditures, the healthcare insurance, I know that I had participated in the healthcare insurance consortium. I know that that talk is being revitalized, and I look forward to participating in that. Can you explain a little bit more on possible shared services where we could save money there? Because I thought we were taking full advantage of our relationship with the surrounding municipalities, or is this something more in line with what you plan on doing with the county, strengthening that relationship for shared services?
I think it's looking at all the options. We were listing everything that might be something we should spend our time looking at. So if there's another opportunity for shared services that we're not taking advantage of now, that we're not aware of right now, that's something we should be looking at. I think all of these things, as you alluded to, are going to take, or as Jenny said, are going to take some time. Certainly establishing a stormwater fund, or looking at setting up a new ambulance fees or service agreements. Those things take some time to figure that out and make sure we have them planned. They're not going to happen overnight. So we think we can aggressively pursue all those ideas in the coming year. We'll see where we get to, and we'll also be able to see what trends show as far as the revenues we used to have that are still reduced in our 2022 tentative budget. Maybe we see that trends get to the point where finance director is more comfortable projecting those revenues coming back to normal status, but it's just not quite there yet. And I think one of the questions you had was about maximizing environmental revenues and fees. I mean, there are miscellaneous revenues that are down over the last few years that we think we might be able to target and get those up again, not necessarily increasing the amount of the fees, maybe in some cases, for example, the armory rental, might be some other recreation fees that maybe could be changed. But there's also just an example of wastewater treatment plant. Since we've upgraded, we've got better equipment now that can handle the flow that comes from level haulers that in the past have been turned away because of the type of material they're bringing in. Now we can start taking those again. We can reach out to them and get that volume back up, that increases that revenue. So there are probably other things like that that we should be looking at.
And so do you feel confident that if we gave you the entire year 22 to shake those out, that those small revenue sources would be able to compensate for the 23 pricing? Because as you just said, and I completely agree, the expenditures are not going down. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if our healthcare insurance goes up another 7%. from 23.
We certainly can't say at this time that we're going to have no unrestricted fund balance needing to be used at our current level of service and our current staffing level in 2023 if we implement these what if scenarios. I think it's, our intent is to look at everything, do the best we can, and then reevaluate in the budget process, which starts in July, through this time of year, next year. And if it comes down to reducing services, which is, I think is something, once you reduce services, especially if it involves credit staff, which no one wants to do, that's something that's hard to come back from. We want to make sure that I think we want to make sure that we maximize all other options before we really seriously consider those. I think that's our approach. Feel free, Jenny, if you'd like to.
No, you said it very nicely, Greg, and that's why we just want some time to see if, all of our ideas, can we explore them? Can we want, Greg and I plan on meeting with every department head and saying, let's analyze your department and what procedures, can we improve on? Can we reduce? Can we coordinate between other departments? Can we consolidate? And we just want to be able to have some time to reach out and look at, maybe it's time to modernize or change what has always been done in the past, only because it's always been done in the past. Is there fresh thinking? Is there fresh ideas? We just want to be able to have the time to sit with each department head, brainstorm, and figure out their departmental operations, their procedures, and if it is the most efficient. And maybe they already are, but we just want to have time to be able to do that. And to look at, as Greg said, shared services with the county or with the other municipalities to see if there's something that we can reduce, but still get the services, but just it'll be a combination of things. We want to meet with Brian to see what his ideas is for the ambulance services. But we just need time to be able to study all of that.
So Jenny, last year, when we budgeted for 2021 for this year, you took a very conservative approach. And you said, let's budget very low for the first 6 months, because let's budget very low for the year, because we really don't know how things are going to play out. And then after 6 months, if things are doing better than expected, we can add to the budget. It seems to me that this year we're taking the opposite approach. We don't know how things are playing out. So instead of being conservative and budgeting low, and then if it looks like things are going better and falling into place, we add to the budget. What we're doing is budgeting high in the hope things go well, and then worry about it if they don't. It seems like we reversed the approach from last year. And I'm just troubled because the first rule of budgeting is you don't spend money that you don't have. And we're spending money on things that we're dreaming about happening.
Well, Mayor, I appreciate your comments. I don't believe that we are taking the opposite approach than we did last year. And the reason I say that is because we put in $1 million of fund balance last year, even though we still budgeted low. We had to balance it with $1 million. We've made up that $1 million. We were able to add 1.4 million to the revenues. But because of the expenditures of how they move forward and the loss of the other revenue areas, we just weren't able to keep pace with it. So last year we had to put $1 million in. This year it's only 690,000. So it's going in the right direction. But it's just that our revenue levels are not up to where they should be. If I had been able to budget the other revenues that we had budgeted in 2020, as I said, we would have 677,000 more in budgeted revenues, which I'm not willing to go there yet. So my approach in this year is to be very conservative on the revenue, so we're not overestimating. But also, we got the department heads down what we think is more, but we can go back and even cut more if you would like, and we can hold all equipment purchases until July if you would like, and cut all of those out. And for the general fund, let me just refresh on what that number is. But in considering the equipment expenditures, just know that we analyzed which equipment expenditures were going to make the staff's work more efficient. And also save us costs on hiring contractors to do it for us. Perfect example is the survey equipment. The survey equipment is in there at $60,000. That is going to allow the staff to do in-house surveys, be able to move the work forward faster because we won't be waiting months for surveyors to be able to get the work done. And we also won't be contracting with the surveyors to have to pay them to do the work. So it's a long-term investment that will return the city with efficiency and future costs. So when Greg and I were going down the equipment list, that's what we were thinking, is what is going to improve the services that we have and also improve the tools for the employees to work with. But, you know, so that would be just over $400,000 in the general fund if you want to have that as your July reconsideration. But also just know, because of the backlog in orders, you know, again, it may be not until 2023 when they actually arrive. So we could also take that approach. The other expenditures that we've gone through, just everything has gone up. For example, there's an additional $30,000 in this budget for an additional order of salt. Normally we budget $90,000, this year it's $120,000. And the reason being is just the timing of when the salt deliveries have happened. You know, we can cut down on that delivery. That's a big ticket dollar item. We can also go back to the department heads and say, if you're catching up on anything that you held up on in 2020, we need you to hold up on that again. So, you know, we can go back, but we've already gone back to them at least twice or three times now to say, you know, what can you cut? We can cut back. One thing that we did last year in 2020 is we cut training. We just basically took almost all the training out of the budget. We can do the same again this year if you would like. And we can just tell department heads only training that is absolutely mandated, which you know, we could add that up and see what it entails. But hiring new staff, especially for public safety, they have to go to the academy. That's where most of the training budget is. So when I said it's a perfect storm, it's just because of where we are in transition of veterans leaving us, new people coming on, or where they are in the actual training level of their career. So we can look at those options. We can come back and do it again. And you know, Greg and I had agreed that we thought that this was, you know, a good plan for now. And then if we needed to make more difficult decisions, we would bring that to you in 2022. But if you want those decisions now, we can develop a plan and bring it back to you again next week. Yes.
I'm on board with the mayor. I'm very concerned about the budget and everything that's going on. And last year, when we unfunded some positions, we're taking a look at it. And one of my questions was about bringing one of them back. I think we brought some of them back too quick. We should have rolled out the whole year before we put them back. And same with some equipment purchases. We said we're going to hang off until July, and all of a sudden we just went through. We spent a lot of money on a street sweeper. Not saying we don't need it great, but you know, just we went and we went and we went, and we hired new positions, and the positions were hired on salary. And I remember sitting here, it was either in finance or right here at the council meeting, and I said, I'm concerned about hiring at such a high rate because our personnel services is already high. And, you know, we got to start really thinking of a 5-year plan on how we're doing things, because I reached out to other areas that talked about COVID and how long they think that they're going to see the pinch that we're going through now. I just think COVID brought this to the forefront quicker for us. I think we're probably going to hit this eventually a few more years down the road where we're going to be in this, what are we going to do next kind of thing. And with that, they're saying they're looking at 5 to 7 years of hardship from what's going on. And they go, that's very conservative. The state, when I talk to state legislators, they're telling me they're looking at 10 years. And they say that they're going to probably have to push that out onto municipalities because they're taking such a hit. So with all this unknown going on, I'm sharing a thing. I understand where you guys are coming from, but I'm worried when I hear the words, I hope, and if we get back to pre-COVID activity, and, you know, I'm not a betting man, I'm not gonna bet that next year is gonna be great. I think we'll hold our own. But I think we need to start making the hard decisions now to get us back into where we need to be in 5 years. And I know Craig said staffing is a big issue because we're not where we need to be. We're low, and I get that. I'm also looking at the private sector has just outpaced what a municipality is paying on base rates now to come work for you. So we're not gonna be competitive in 3 years to even try to pull people to come do some of the jobs. And I don't hear the plan, this, with the budget, I keep saying, what's the plan for further on down the road? I just keep hearing, well, I hope. Well, if we do this, we hope we'll get this. If we do this, maybe we'll get this. I'm not comfortable pulling out of our reserves another time if we do it this time. So I think we need to really think about maybe doing like we did last year. I understand that equipment might not come in until 2023. I get that. But maybe we should hold that back off until July again. See where we're at, see how things are playing out, see where we're standing. Maybe we have to, like Dave said, maybe we'll have to go to the 3% this year. I mean, I'm not sure how that's gonna play out. If we do that, that doesn't give us a lot, but it's a reoccurring down the road. And I'm getting everything that you're saying. But I'm thinking to myself, I think we get put in this office to make these hard decisions, that I think every option should always come in front of us so we can make these decisions. And I don't think you guys should hold them back and say that this is the best budget we think we can come up with. I would like to see the plan of, this is what we would like to see, but here's a couple more options down the road, what do you guys want to do? Because ultimately it relies on us. And with all that being said, I'm thinking, I think we probably shouldn't have funded some of the positions. I think we really have to look at possibly unfunding them again, like we did last year. I think we're gonna have to look at putting things off a little bit until July. I mean, when I sit here and I look at 70% of a personal service line, we're kind of upside down. I've talked to other municipalities about that, and they're like, when you start getting above 60%, you're going in the wrong direction. And I don't know how we can start dialing that back as a council, what we can do. We're looking at all these other options. We started all these hard talks with finance. Greg's coming up with ideas. Jenny, you've come up with ideas. But the ideas aren't there and aren't being implemented yet. And I think we're at a hard spot right now. We really need to think on what we really need to do. We have to make the hard decisions. I'm not sure I'm comfortable giving you a whole year and see where we end up. That to me is very uncomfortable to say, we'll see where we end up at 2022. You know, at the end of it, I'm not sure that makes me very comfortable to give a whole year. That's just my opinion, so.
I think Luke's got his hand up.
A lot of what's been said it makes a lot of sense. I will give my perspective just because it's from a little bit of a different vantage point. Understanding that we're dipping into our reserves a lot. I also believe that these estimates, these hopes were not made on a whim. I think a lot of time and effort has been put into these. I also know that Oneonta, not to disparage surrounding municipalities, but we do a lot for the folks of Oneonta that a lot of other municipalities can't or won't. And if we want to grow as a city, we have to continue to invest in our future. And in my opinion, that includes times like these. I was comforted to hear that Ginny and Greg both have plans. Yes, it would be much better to hear this is definitely going to happen as opposed to I hope, but I also understand that neither of them can tell the future. But comfortable, I don't think it's the right word. But I do trust in their methods and the timeline they've given us. And if they think it's the best way going forward, I'll listen.
Okay,
First of all, I'd just like to thank the three of you actually for all the work you've done on this budget. This is not an easy year. I think possibly part of the issue that we're having is we've all underestimated how long the impact of the pandemic is impacting our budgets, and maybe for a number of years. But we talked about trying to put all the options on the table. I think we need to do that. I agree with everybody right so far. But I think we owe it to the residents to try every measure that we can think about. And that includes, I like the idea of removing the equipment costs until July again. See what happens over the next few months, and then possibly.
yeah, Ollie, we're having a budget workshop before the council.
Okay.
So we're fine.
And then potentially adding things back. If we have to, we cut training for right now, except what's mandated. I don't want to discuss defunding positions that we put in, because that also just stokes fear. And I don't want to go down that road, because that's creates a domino effect. And I said this last week, we have not hit that tax cap in all the years I've been on council. And I hate to do that, but I really think we should consider going to the tax cap, looking at the predicament we're in and the number of projects that either we want to do or we have to do. We're talking about all options. I think we really need to try as many options as possible to overcome the problems that we're facing right now.
See if anybody else want to get back to everybody else have a chance. Mark?
Yeah, so again, as Dave was saying, and several other people have said, I think I agree with most every single thing that's been said. However, I really do buy in, Ginny and Greg, into your assessment of the potential turnaround in our revenue streams. What I would suggest is that we look at what we had done last year is essentially in having a budget that we revisit at the halfway mark and to make a determination as to what we want to do. I am optimistic that we have revenue streams that are going to rebound, but I would like to see what the actual cost savings would be in deferring equipment purchases and deferring training and some of the other lines that you've already identified. I'm sure there are a couple more that you might be able to identify. If we could see that, I'm also I'm almost on board with Dave relative to the to that percentage, although as I said last week, I think I'd be more inclined to land at around 2.5%. I think that extra 0.5% over the 2 that you budgeted here, the compounding of that 5% of the 0.5% is something that I think can be overestimated in terms of its value as we look at future budgets. So I'd like to think that maybe we don't look at 3 or 3.1, but maybe 2.5 and see where that takes us. And if we can take a look at what our savings might be in the short term and then plan to revisit, obviously working all the way through the year and keeping track and benchmarking and keeping track of things, but revisit as we get into June and July to either say, yeah, we were right on, or we need to make these adjustments. That would be my suggestion.
Anybody else? Look at your other comment.
Just a quick question, Denny, if you don't have this information in front of you, by no means, it's all right. Do you know approximately how much you could save by deferring non-essential trainings?
Off the top of my head, no, there's, the majority, I would have to talk with the fire chief and the police chief, because that's where the majority of the training costs are. And so I would have to analyze that before I could quote you a number. Now, with the other departments, what I would do is I would go through and I would just cut out all the NICOM training, and, just see if by July, the funds are there, so we can reinstate that. But amongst the other departments, I want to say, it might be $20,000, but the big numbers in training. The training cost this year went up $80,000 from the request from last year. And most of that is in public safety. So again, it's because we're getting new recruits. So, and one thing that I do want to point out, this budget right now includes funding 3 new firefighters in anticipation to the retirements coming up. That also includes 3 family plans of health insurance. Now, if those new recruits are not family coverage, then that cost will go way down, because 1 year of family coverage, the net is about $23,000 a year. So multiply that by 3. So, that's almost $70,000 right there. So if they come in at single or a buyout, that would be an immediate savings. So, And also remember that we are being proactive in preparing for the retirements, and those numbers are reflected in this budget.
So Jamie, I'm going to throw out some of my, it sounds like there's some desire to look at options. If good options, maybe reject it outright, which is fine, but at least there'll be discussion today about them. And we can all feel that we talked through. We looked at everything. We turned everything over and we didn't find any money. So we feel we've done our due diligence. I'm going to throw out some of the ideas that pop into my head, and some of them may be completely, I don't claim any of them are right. I'm not. They don't have the level of expertise on budget to do, that's for sure. But I'm going to throw them out. Anyways, at the risk of possibly sounding foolish. You've spoken about taking a considerable amount of money this year and putting it into restricted reserves. There's money we got to sell of the DC parking lot, there's stuff for the parking reserve, there's money about selling the facilities reserve, I think. We have always put a lot of money into restricted reserves because we've always had a lot of money in our unrestricted fund balance, and we've got too much money in our unrestricted fund balance, so it made sense to put in restricted reserve. That's no longer the case. Why are we restricting money? Why shouldn't we just put as few demands on the money we have so that we can make choices on how we use it as we need it, as opposed to putting in a restriction? For example, if instead of putting these monies into restricted reserves, where we put rules on it, it can only be used for this or that, why are we not putting them into a fund balance, protect the fund balance from where we're taking out of it? And we can always still use it for parking. We can always still use it for facilities. But it gives us options. So when you have less money, it seems like, why put rules on yourself that you don't have?
Well, the reason that I suggest doing the reserves is that because that gives you a plan of how you want to spend your money. So by putting the reserves in highway equipment or public safety or setting up the IT reserve, you are doing a long-term plan of how you want to utilize your surplus.
Right, but we can still have a plan. We can still say our plan is to hope to use this for parking, and keep it in our unrestricted fund balance. Why tie us down when, it's one thing when you have excess money in your fund balance. When you don't, why tie us down with rules and requirements and restrictions? that we don't need to have, and it doesn't prevent us from doing what we need to do in these uncertain times. One thought, let me just pull my other thoughts, because I don't spend a lot of time on each one. You can,
Yep,
you
yep.
can mull them over and come back as to why they won't work. On the subject of, also reserves, we've had a practice, which again made sense when we had a lot of money in our fund balance. And some of the things I say, and some of our department heads are not going to be happy with me, and I apologize for that, but my first priority is the welfare of the future of the city. If we've had, for instance, if the police have vacancies this year or last year or the year before, the money that is not spent, we always put into a public safety reserve, so that it could be used by the police department, because they saved money on staff. Now they could use the money on uniforms or cars or whatever it may be. When you have uncertain times, you don't have excess money, is that really what we should do? Should we really keep money in silos? I mean, we are all in this together. We are one organization. And if money is saved here, shouldn't that money go back into, in these times, the overall fund balance, so that it can be used where in the city it's needed most? Not just because there was an open position of police, we use it to buy uniforms next year. So instead of dumping money into restricted reserves during these times when we don't have excess fund, unrestricted fund balance, is that the right thing to do? Should we take more of a holistic approach and less of a silo approach, that we're all in this together? I had mentioned the last time we met, last week, that we budget 100% of all of our staff positions as being full. Now, we know that will never, ever happen. And every year, at the end of the year, we have a lot of money saved in personnel costs. There's never going to be a year where we haven't saved a lot of money from what we budget personnel costs, because it's impossible that 100% of the positions will be full. If we budgeted for a vacancy rate, which was 5%, 10%, that could reduce the amount that we're budgeting to take out of our fund balance. And what happens every year is when we save this money, because we over budget in personnel, what we wind up doing is making we're making budget transfers. And in the course of the year, we say, well, since we didn't budget for this and we didn't have money for this, it's not in our budget, we're just going to transfer money from personnel and spend it on this anyways. So what we're doing is we're setting ourselves up to spend more than we have. If we budget for a vacancy rate, and we can be conservative in figuring it, and not just budget more than we're going to spend on personnel, and then just do budget transfers to take those savings out of personnel to spend on other things, would be, I think, more fiscally responsible. And then finally, this is really going to hurt me to say, and I know we're making friends with some of our department heads, which does not make me happy. But I look at some of the positions that we're adding to this contract. I know that we've got 3 firefighters positions in there that are temporary. And they're there to transition to prepare to plan retirement, so that we don't have a vacancy, so we have people on board and trained when the vacancy occurs, and that makes perfect sense. But I never heard any discussion about when are those actual retirements planned for. Are they all planned? Can these 3 be phased? Are all of the retirements planned for the next 6 months? Are they all planned for 2022? Are some going to be in 2023? And is it necessary to hire if the purpose is to have people on board when retirements take place, before the retirements take place, is it necessary to hire all 3 January? And this one really hurts me because I've been a big advocate of the community development deputy. But, you know, again, that's a new position. Judy is overworked and I've argued for 2 years to pull that position. But again, we have to make some hard choices. And I would just take a second look at that. Our DLI is drying up. A lot of our grants, there will be less administrative grants required in the year ahead. Can we hold off on that a little bit? I'm not, let's at least discuss it. And Judy, I'm sorry, don't kill me. But I just, you know, my first loyalty has to be to the well-being of the citizens. I'm done.
Okay. Do you want me to respond now, or would you like me to respond next week?
Yeah, think it over. I don't want to put you on the spot. Think
Okay.
it over, and you can respond next week, or respond right away. Whatever.
Is there any other input? Is there any other input from the council members as far as the materials that you have read that you would like me to go back to the department heads to discuss? Are there any particular items?
I just had a couple like specific item questions. They're definitely potatoes, but it, like you said, like small things. Would it be better for me to just email those questions to you and CC the council rather than going like over tiny little nuggets right now? Okay, cool. And the other thing is the report that you sent me, some of those things look important. And so I'd like to know from that department head, like why they feel like that could be put off, specifically the security in the public safety building. That seemed really important. When I saw that was put off, I was like, oh no, like, do we need this? And so just knowing a little bit more background about that would be great. And then, you know, I see in here, we have $52,000 budgeted for street trees, which I'm all for, do not get me wrong. But, you know, just thinking about like security, it's the public safety building versus maybe you can spend half of that on street trees to get that project done. Just thinking about the allocation of funds, and I know that you guys have thought all of that through, and so it's really more about just for my understanding. But you know, sometimes fresh eyes on things is helpful too. So I'll just email my questions if that's okay, and I'll just CC everybody, and then you guys can come along for my fact finding.
So just to kind of recap, so I understand this completely, so for next week, I've heard it multiple times, Dave, Gary, Scott, and Mark mentioned this, can we see the option packages? So from the worst case scenario, which you listed that out as staff reduction, to what we have. So I think there was 3 different options that you wanted to kind of paint the picture for us. And then take a look at the other suggestions that were made tonight. And you mentioned that if we hold off just on the general fund for equipment purchases, it would be $400,000 until July. So that gives you some time. And then looking at your action plan, if you can give just some quick dates of when do you think realistically you could have that action plan implemented. So you've given us the ideas, but now can you take it a step further and say, okay, if we actually do this, we could implement this month, this year. I think that would help us understand what timeline we're actually looking at. Thank you.
Anybody else? Jenny, you told me that, I have the greatest respect for the work that you've done on this, and that Greg has done that. But, you know, we all come from different perspectives,
Oh, I understand.
and that's what makes it work.
Oh, I understand. And that's what these meetings are for. They're to get your feedback, they're to get your viewpoint, to see what your goals are, and we'll do the best we can to implement them.
If there's nothing else, the budget meeting is adjourned.